Thousands of years ago, in the grand city of Alexandria, Egypt, a dream was born, a dream that would change the course of human history. It was a dream of knowledge, a dream to gather the wisdom of the world in one place. Alexandria, a city founded by Alexander the Great around 331 BCE, was strategically located on the Mediterranean coast, making it a bustling hub for trade, culture, and learning. After Alexander's death, his empire was divided, and Egypt fell into the hands of one of his generals, Ptolemy I. Ptolemy, a ruler deeply influenced by his former commander's love for learning, shared Alexander's vision for creating a center of knowledge that would rival anything the world had seen before. Ptolemy's vision was simple but profound. He sought to collect all the knowledge of the ancient world. This vision led to the creation of what would become the greatest library ever known to humanity, the Library of Alexandria. This was not just a library filled with books, it was a repository of wisdom, a place where the world's most brilliant minds could gather, write, and share ideas. The library was founded in the Ptolemaic period, a time of relative peace and prosperity in Egypt. Alexandria was the intellectual and cultural capital of the ancient Mediterranean, a city that drew scholars, scientists, philosophers, and artists from all corners of the ancient world. Ptolemy I set in motion the collection of scrolls and manuscripts from all the lands that came under his influence. The library, which stood at the heart of Alexandria, became the symbol of a flourishing intellectual culture. In its early years, it gathered texts from all over the known world, especially from Greek-speaking cities, as well as from Egypt, Persia, and beyond. The Ptolemaic rulers made it a priority to acquire as many scrolls as possible, often sending agents to borrow books from all over the Mediterranean to bring them back to Alexandria, copying them and adding them to the library's collection. The library's collections were vast, covering subjects like philosophy, mathematics, astronomy, medicine, geography, and literature. Some of the greatest thinkers of the time, such as Euclid, Aristarchus, Archimedes, and Eratosthenes, were said to have worked there. They spent their days studying the stars, studying the earth, and developing ideas that would shape the future of science for centuries to come. The library was not just a building full of scrolls. It was an intellectual hub where scholars, philosophers, and students from all over the world came to learn and exchange ideas. It became one of the most renowned centers of knowledge and learning in the ancient world, attracting famous philosophers, mathematicians, and scientists from all over. But the library's true significance wasn't just in the quantity of its collection. It was in the quality of what it contained. The texts housed there weren't merely books. They were the records of humanity's greatest ideas, works of literature, scientific discoveries, and the fundamental knowledge of how the world worked. The greatest minds of the ancient world, such as Plato, Aristotle, Pythagoras, and Socrates, had written or inspired texts that were now gathered in Alexandria. The library became the heart of intellectual activity, where scholars from around the world gathered to study, discuss, and debate the ideas that had shaped human history. Yet, despite the wealth of knowledge housed in the library, it remained a mystery to many. How did scholars in Alexandria manage to acquire such a vast collection of knowledge? What was the process of gathering these texts? And how did they preserve the writings of the greatest minds of the ancient world? The answers to these questions are lost to time, but what we do know is that the library was a symbol of the Ptolemaic dynasty's power and influence. It represented the grand ambitions of a ruler who sought not just to rule Egypt, but to become the custodian of knowledge itself. As the library grew, so did Alexandria's reputation. It became a magnet for intellectuals and an embodiment of the idea that knowledge and learning should be shared by all. Over time, the library was seen as a place of sanctuary for those seeking wisdom. Scholars who worked there were respected and valued for their contributions to the intellectual world. They were seen as part of something greater than themselves, part of a tradition that would last for centuries. But as we know, nothing in history lasts forever. Despite the library's grandeur and success, forces were at work that would eventually lead to its destruction. How it fell and what exactly was lost remains shrouded in mystery. But before we get to that tragic end, we must first understand the library's greatest achievements and why it stood as a beacon of human knowledge for over 3 centuries. By the time of Ptolemy II, the Library of Alexandria had already grown beyond the wildest dreams of its founder. It wasn't just a collection of scrolls anymore. It had become a beacon of knowledge that attracted the brightest minds from around the ancient world. The library wasn't just an academic institution, it was a symbol of the power and ambition of Alexandria itself. In the golden age of the library, scholars, philosophers, and scientists gathered from all corners of the Mediterranean. They came from Greece, Persia, India, Egypt, and beyond, all eager to share their ideas and contribute to the wealth of knowledge housed within the library's walls. At this time, the Ptolemaic rulers of Egypt understood the importance of culture and education. They knew that knowledge was not just for the elite, it could shape the future of the entire empire. That's why the Library of Alexandria was open to the most brilliant thinkers of the age, and why the Ptolemies used their vast wealth to collect manuscripts, scrolls, and texts from every corner of the ancient world. As part of the library's effort to collect all the world's knowledge, the Ptolemies sent agents to faraway lands to borrow books and manuscripts, copying them and adding them to the library's collection. The Library of Alexandria had one of the most impressive collections of texts ever seen. Texts in Greek, Hebrew, Egyptian, Persian, and other languages. Books on astronomy, mathematics, medicine, philosophy, history, and geography were all gathered in one place. It wasn't just about having books. It was about preserving human wisdom for future generations. Among the scholars who frequented the library were some of the greatest minds in history. The famous mathematician and inventor Archimedes is said to have studied there, as well as Euclid, the father of geometry. Eratosthenes, a Greek scholar, used the library's resources to calculate the circumference of the Earth, a remarkable feat that would lay the groundwork for future scientific discoveries. The library wasn't just a building filled with books, it was a dynamic intellectual centre. People came not just to read, but to exchange ideas. Great debates were held, and new theories and ideas were constantly being tested. This made the library a true hub of innovation. In this environment, ideas were born that would change the way people thought about the world. One of the most important achievements of the library was the work of Ptolemy I's successors. They established the famous Museum of Alexandria, which was not just a museum in the modern sense, but a centre for research and scholarship. The museum was located near the library, and together they formed the heart of Alexandria's intellectual life. Scholars who lived in the museum were provided with everything they needed: room, board, and access to the library's vast collection of texts. The museum was more than just a place of learning, it was also a place of discovery. Some of the earliest advances in astronomy, mathematics, and physics came out of the work done in the museum and the library. For instance, the great philosopher Aristarchus was the first to propose a model of the universe in which the Earth revolved around the Sun, long before Copernicus in the 16th century. This theory was revolutionary, though it would not be accepted in the Western world for centuries. In addition to science, the library was also a cultural hub. Writers, poets, and philosophers came to Alexandria to share their ideas and works. It was here that the poet Homer's epic Iliad and Odyssey were preserved, ensuring that the great works of Greek literature would continue to be read for generations. In fact, it's believed that the library helped preserve many of the works of classical Greece, some of which might have been lost forever if not for the careful preservation efforts of the librarians. The library also played a vital role in the translation of important texts. Many of the great works of Greek philosophy, including those of Plato and Aristotle, were translated into Egyptian, Syriac, and Latin, making them accessible to a wider audience and influencing thinkers from Rome to Persia. This effort helped spread Greek philosophy across the Mediterranean and beyond, ensuring its survival and influence throughout the ages. The library's golden age was a time of incredible intellectual growth, but it was also a period of political turmoil. Alexandria itself was often caught in the crossfire of competing interests. While the library flourished, there were always those who sought to control it or destroy it, whether they were local leaders, foreign invaders, or rival factions within the Roman Empire. Despite these challenges, the library remained a place of learning, debate, and exchange for several centuries. The golden age of the Library of Alexandria didn't last forever. Although the library remained a powerful symbol of knowledge and culture, the winds of change were inevitable. As time passed, the empire that supported it, Egypt under the Ptolemaic dynasty, began to weaken. A slow but steady decline set in, and the library found itself caught in a web of political intrigue, foreign invasions, and changing tides of history. It became a symbol of a grand civilization that was beginning to crumble under the pressure of external forces. The first major blow to the library came from the Roman Empire. In 30 BCE, after the death of Cleopatra VII, the last of the Ptolemaic rulers, Egypt fell under Roman control. While the Romans respected and admired the ancient cultures they conquered, they were also keen on consolidating their power. As a result, Alexandria, once the shining jewel of the Ptolemaic dynasty, became just another city in the Roman Empire, and the library's significance began to wane. However, it wasn't just the Roman Empire that contributed to the library's decline. Alexandria itself, once a centre of intellectual life, was no longer the bustling metropolis it once was. The political upheavals within the city, coupled with the growing importance of Rome, meant that fewer and fewer scholars came to Alexandria to study or write. The great intellectual vitality that had defined the library was fading. The Ptolemies were no longer around to fund and protect the library, and the once invincible institution was starting to lose its relevance. At this time, we must also consider the growing influence of Christianity in the Roman Empire. As the Roman Emperor Constantine the Great embraced Christianity in the early 4th century CE, the dynamics of Alexandria and its relationship with the library changed dramatically. Alexandria had always been a melting pot of cultures, with many different faiths and philosophies coexisting. However, Christianity's rise to power in the Roman Empire meant that many pagan philosophies, including those taught in the library, were increasingly viewed with suspicion or outright hostility. Christianity's ascension in the Roman world led to a growing divide between the old religious traditions and the new faith. In Alexandria, this divide often manifested in violent confrontations between the Christians and the pagan intellectuals who had long called the city home. One of the most infamous events in the library's decline was the rise of the Christian bishop Theophilus in 391 CE. Theophilus was a staunch opponent of paganism, and he was particularly eager to rid Alexandria of the old gods and any institutions that promoted their worship. In 391 CE, he led a mob of Christians to the famous Serapeum of Alexandria, a temple to the god Serapis that housed a part of the library's collection. Theophilus's followers ransacked and destroyed the temple, and in the process they also destroyed whatever remained of the library. Though it is not clear whether the Library of Alexandria itself was fully destroyed during this event, the destruction of the Serapeum, which housed many scrolls and books from the library, marked a devastating blow to the once mighty collection. Some scholars argue that this event, more than any other, marks the beginning of the library's final destruction. While the library may have been in decline for centuries due to the shifting political and intellectual landscape, the violent actions of Theophilus and his followers effectively removed any remaining remnants of the once glorious collection. While some texts may have survived the destruction of the Serapeum, there was another tragic blow waiting for the library in the 7th century CE. In the year 642, the great city of Alexandria fell to the forces of the Arab Caliphate. The conquest of Alexandria by the Arabs led to the final collapse of the ancient city's intellectual legacy. The fall of Alexandria to the Arabs is often cited as the final act in the library's demise. According to some sources, Caliph Omar, who led the Arab forces, ordered the burning of the remaining books in Alexandria as part of his conquest. The story goes that when Omar was told that the books of the library still existed in the city's libraries, he allegedly declared, "If these books agree with the Quran, they are unnecessary. If they disagree, they are heretical. Either way, he ordered them destroyed." However, the historicity of this claim is debated. Some scholars argue that it's more of a myth created over the centuries, while others believe it was based on a historical event that happened at the time. What is clear, however, is that Alexandria's intellectual decline was tied to these external forces, and the library's once great collection of knowledge gradually faded into the past. The fate of the Library of Alexandria has remained one of the greatest mysteries of the ancient world. The Library of Alexandria's destruction is one of the greatest intellectual tragedies in history. While it is impossible to know exactly what was lost in the flames, the surviving accounts of the library's contents provide us with a glimpse of the unimaginable wealth of knowledge that disappeared. In the library's heyday, it housed hundreds of thousands of scrolls. Some estimates suggest as many as 400,000, representing the best of the ancient world's scholarship across numerous fields, including science, philosophy, medicine, literature, and history. With the burning of the library and the eventual loss of its texts, much of this knowledge was irretrievably lost to time. Scientific and mathematical works. The Library of Alexandria was not just a repository for literary works, it was a centre of cutting-edge scientific discovery. Many ancient scholars worked within the library's walls, and their discoveries would shape human understanding for centuries. Figures like Euclid, the father of geometry, and Archimedes, one of the greatest mathematicians and engineers of the ancient world, spent time in Alexandria. Euclid's Elements, his famous work on geometry, was considered the definitive textbook on mathematics for centuries. His axiomatic approach to geometry was taught for over 2,000 years, forming the foundation for modern mathematics. Imagine how much earlier mathematical advancements could have been made had more of Euclid's lost works been preserved. Archimedes is another figure whose contributions were studied in the library. He made groundbreaking discoveries in mathematics, physics, and engineering. His work on levers, pulleys, and the principle of buoyancy led to technologies that would be developed thousands of years later. Archimedes' lost writings could have further deepened our understanding of ancient engineering feats, from the construction of war machines to early astronomical devices. Additionally, Hipparchus, the father of astronomy, worked at the library. He created a star catalogue and was the first to calculate the length of the solar year with incredible precision. Claudius Ptolemy, another astronomer associated with Alexandria, developed the geocentric model of the universe, which would dominate Western thought until the 16th century. If more of their astronomical writings had survived, the progress in astronomy and astrophysics could have been advanced far earlier. Medical knowledge and practices. The library also housed vast collections of medical works, and Alexandria was a hub for the study of anatomy and physiology. The library's scholars had access to the works of Hippocrates, often called the father of medicine, and Galen, a Greek physician whose work became the standard for Western medicine for over a millennium. Many of Hippocrates' teachings, such as the importance of observation and diagnosis in medicine, were carried forward through the centuries. His famous Hippocratic oath, still taken by doctors today, originated from the moral framework created at Alexandria. His writings on diseases, healthcare, and surgery influenced not just Greek and Roman physicians, but also Islamic scholars during the Golden Age of Islam, who preserved and expanded upon this medical knowledge. Galen's works, particularly on anatomy, surgery, and pharmacology, became an integral part of the study of medicine for hundreds of years. The library likely contained not just the surviving writings of these authors, but also their unwritten discoveries and notes, offering a far more complete understanding of the human body and the treatment of disease. Had these medical texts survived, our understanding of the body could have developed far earlier, potentially saving countless lives in history. Philosophical and literary texts. The Library of Alexandria was a place where the greatest minds of the ancient world came together to debate, write, and expand on ideas. Philosophers like Plato, Aristotle, and Socrates laid the intellectual foundation for much of Western philosophy, and their works were carefully preserved and studied in Alexandria. The dialogues of Plato, with their discussions of ethics, governance, and the nature of reality, helped to shape Western philosophical thought for centuries. Aristotle, whose treatises covered subjects ranging from ethics and metaphysics to biology and politics, was instrumental in the development of logical reasoning. His Nicomachean Ethics remains a cornerstone of moral philosophy, while his Poetics influenced literature and drama for millennia. But the loss of these works in the library's destruction goes beyond just those well-known texts. The philosophers of the ancient world were often prolific, and their unpublished works, their notes, commentaries, and revisions were also housed in the library. These writings could have illuminated the development of philosophical thought in ways that we can only imagine today. The impact of the Library of Alexandria's destruction cannot be understated. While the physical loss of so many texts was a tragedy, the intellectual and cultural implications were felt for centuries. The library wasn't just a place where scrolls were stored. It was a vital centre for the exchange of ideas and a beacon of knowledge for the ancient world. The scholars who gathered there shared, debated, and built upon each other's work. With its destruction, the flow of intellectual progress was interrupted, and humanity lost not only the tangible works housed within its walls, but also the collective momentum of centuries of learning. In the centuries following the library's loss, Europe and the Mediterranean world entered what is often referred to as the Dark Ages, a period of intellectual stagnation. While learning and cultural exchange didn't cease entirely during this time, the absence of a central hub of knowledge meant that progress slowed significantly. Many of the ideas, theories, and discoveries that had been developed at Alexandria would be rediscovered only after a long period of darkness, if at all. The ideas of Aristotle, Plato, and Ptolemy had been so influential that their rediscovery became a cornerstone of the Renaissance hundreds of years later. During this long period of intellectual dormancy, much of the knowledge once housed in Alexandria's library was lost to time. The ancient works of mathematicians and scientists were gradually forgotten, and medical texts were often ignored or misinterpreted. Although the Roman Empire had made tremendous advances in the fields of engineering, law, and military strategy, many of the cutting-edge discoveries that had been made at Alexandria were no longer available to scholars. Even within the Roman Empire, knowledge was distributed across different regions, which meant that there was no central institution comparable to the Library of Alexandria to ensure the preservation of knowledge. One of the key losses was the body of medical knowledge. Alexandria had been at the forefront of the study of medicine, and the scholars there had access to the works of great thinkers like Hippocrates and Galen. Hippocrates, whose teachings formed the foundation of Western medicine, had emphasized the importance of observation, diagnosis, and treatment based on empirical evidence. But after the destruction of the library, much of this knowledge was either lost or distorted. The works of Galen, a Greek physician who built upon Hippocrates' ideas, were similarly forgotten for centuries. Galen's medical treatises, which included detailed studies of anatomy, surgery, and pharmacology, shaped the practice of medicine in both the Roman Empire and the Islamic world. His understanding of the human body and disease was revolutionary, but after the library's destruction, this knowledge gradually became less influential in the Western world, where scholars would struggle to make significant progress for many centuries. However, the Islamic world preserved much of the knowledge that had been lost to the West. In the early centuries of the Islamic Golden Age, scholars in cities like Baghdad translated many of the Greek and Roman texts into Arabic. These translations included the works of Aristotle, Euclid, and Galen, and many of these texts were used as the basis for further scientific and medical discoveries. The preservation of this ancient knowledge was vital, and it laid the foundation for the later rediscovery of classical ideas during the European Renaissance. The Islamic scholars didn't simply preserve ancient texts, they also expanded upon them. For example, Ibn Sina, known in the West as Avicenna, wrote The Canon of Medicine, a comprehensive medical encyclopedia that integrated Greek, Roman, and Islamic medical knowledge. His work became the standard medical reference in both the Islamic world and Europe for centuries. Scholars in the Islamic world, such as Al-Razi and Al-Farabi, also made significant advancements in fields like chemistry, mathematics, and philosophy. As Europe began to emerge from the intellectual stagnation of the Dark Ages, the rediscovery of ancient Greek and Roman knowledge played a pivotal role in the development of the Renaissance. The Renaissance saw a renewed interest in the classics, and scholars began to study and translate works that had been forgotten for centuries. Texts from the Library of Alexandria, such as those by Euclid and Archimedes, were brought back into the fold of European intellectual life. During the Renaissance, many of the ideas that had been developed in Alexandria were revived, but with a new emphasis on experimentation and observation. The scientific method, which would later be championed by figures like Galileo, Kepler, and Newton, was a direct result of the intellectual traditions that had been nurtured in places like Alexandria. The destruction of the Library of Alexandria represents a pivotal moment in the history of knowledge. It's not just a physical loss of books and manuscripts. It is the loss of a vision where human intellectual achievement transcended borders, and religions, cultures, and empires came together to share their wisdom. But what happened to the knowledge that was housed in the library? And how did the surviving intellectual traditions influence the future of human civilization? The loss of the library was felt across the ancient world, but the immediate consequences were not as catastrophic as one might imagine. After all, other great centres of learning and scholarship remained, and many of the ideas nurtured in Alexandria were spread to other parts of the world. The impact of Alexandria's destruction was profound in the long term, but it wasn't the only centre of learning during antiquity. Alexandria's loss was compounded by the fall of other great institutions of knowledge that followed. The city of Alexandria had been a crossroads for trade, culture, and intellectual exchange. Scholars from all over the ancient world travelled there to learn and contribute to the growing body of knowledge. The library was a melting pot of different civilizations: Greek, Egyptian, Jewish, Persian, Indian, and others. The cultural exchange that occurred in Alexandria made it a uniquely dynamic place of intellectual growth. But as Alexandria fell into decline, so too did the centrality of the city in the world of ideas. Other centres of learning, however, continued to thrive. Cities like Athens, Rome, and later Baghdad became the intellectual homes of scholars who were dedicated to preserving and expanding upon the knowledge of the ancient world. Despite the loss of the library, many of the texts that had been studied and copied in Alexandria were preserved elsewhere. The transition of knowledge from Alexandria to other parts of the ancient world was carried out in large part by the people of the Roman Empire, which by the time of Alexandria's decline was the dominant power in the Mediterranean. The Romans were particularly interested in preserving Greek knowledge, including the works of philosophers like Plato and Aristotle. They also made significant contributions to fields such as law and engineering. Roman scholars did their best to safeguard and pass on the intellectual treasures of the Greek world, but it was clear that they were unable to replicate the unique intellectual environment that Alexandria had fostered. One of the most important legacies of Alexandria was the preservation and transmission of Greek philosophy, especially the works of Plato, Aristotle, and other Greek thinkers. After the fall of the library, many of these texts were translated into Latin and later into Arabic, keeping the intellectual traditions of Alexandria alive in the Mediterranean world. The importance of translating these works cannot be overstated. The ability to translate Greek texts into other languages allowed knowledge to spread far beyond the Mediterranean. In the East, the Islamic world played a crucial role in preserving and expanding upon the knowledge of Alexandria. During the Islamic Golden Age, which began in the 8th century, scholars in cities like Baghdad, Damascus, and Cairo made significant contributions to science, mathematics, medicine, and philosophy. They translated many Greek and Roman works into Arabic, thus saving much of the knowledge that had been lost to the West during the Dark Ages. Islamic scholars not only preserved the works of ancient Greece and Rome, but also made their own original contributions. For instance, the Persian philosopher Avicenna, known as Ibn Sina in the Islamic world, wrote the Canon of Medicine, which became a standard medical textbook in both the Islamic world and Europe for centuries. His work was built upon the ideas of Galen and Hippocrates, but he also made significant advancements of his own, especially in the fields of pharmacology and physiology. The translation movement that began in the Islamic world played a key role in the reintroduction of lost knowledge to Europe. Many Greek and Roman texts were rediscovered through translations into Arabic, and these works later found their way back into Latin in the 12th and 13th centuries. This process helped spark the intellectual revival of Europe, which would culminate in the Renaissance. The translation movement in the Islamic world was part of a larger intellectual culture that valued knowledge and learning. The scholars of the Islamic world were deeply committed to preserving ancient knowledge while also advancing it. Their work laid the groundwork for many of the scientific and philosophical advancements that would occur during the European Renaissance. Without the intellectual work of the scholars in the Islamic world, the story of the Library of Alexandria and the tremendous loss it represents is far from over. As we continue to explore the impact of its destruction, it's important to understand that the library was more than just a repository of books. It was a living, breathing entity, a symbol of human ambition, intellectual curiosity, and the relentless pursuit of knowledge. Its legacy extends far beyond the walls of Alexandria, influencing generations of thinkers, scholars, and dreamers. But as with all great tragedies, the loss of the library set in motion a series of events that shaped the intellectual history of the world for centuries to come. One of the lasting effects of the destruction of the library was the shift in how knowledge was transmitted. In ancient Alexandria, knowledge was shared freely, with scholars from various cultures and backgrounds coming together to exchange ideas. It was a melting pot of knowledge, a place where intellectual collaboration and innovation flourished. The library was a hub of learning where ancient wisdom was preserved and passed on to future generations. But with its loss, the ideal of a central, universal repository of knowledge seemed to disappear. In the centuries that followed, the world became a more fragmented place intellectually. The fall of the library didn't just affect the Egyptian world or the Mediterranean, it had global consequences. Knowledge and learning began to be distributed across different regions and civilizations. No longer could scholars from all over the world gather in one place to exchange ideas. Instead, learning was increasingly localized, and intellectual progress occurred in isolated pockets of the world. The Eastern world, particularly the Islamic world, played a crucial role in preserving and expanding upon the knowledge of the ancient world. During the Islamic Golden Age, scholars in cities like Baghdad, Damascus, and Cairo helped keep the flame of knowledge alive by translating Greek, Roman, and Indian texts into Arabic. These translations allowed the intellectual legacy of Alexandria and the broader Greek and Roman world to continue. Without the work of these scholars, much of the knowledge that had been housed in the library would have been lost to history. One of the most important intellectual contributions from the Islamic world during this time was the preservation and expansion of Greek scientific and philosophical ideas. Scholars like Al-Khwarizmi, Avicenna, Ibn Sina, and Al-Razi, Razes, were instrumental in the development of mathematics, medicine, and philosophy. They built upon the works of ancient Greek philosophers like Pythagoras, Aristotle, and Plato, synthesizing these ideas with their own innovations. The Islamic world became a beacon of knowledge and learning, and its scholars preserved much of what was lost in Alexandria. The transmission of knowledge from the Islamic world to Europe was another crucial turning point in the history of knowledge. During the Middle Ages, many of the Greek and Roman texts that had been preserved by Islamic scholars were reintroduced to Europe. These texts were translated into Latin and became a foundational part of the European Renaissance. The rediscovery of Aristotle, Euclid, and Ptolemy, among others, played a key role in the revival of intellectual life in Europe, paving the way for the scientific revolution and the birth of modern science. The Renaissance, a period of cultural and intellectual rebirth in Europe, was deeply influenced by the rediscovery of ancient Greek and Roman knowledge. Scholars in Italy, France, and Spain eagerly sought out lost works and translated them into the vernacular languages of Europe. The works of Plato, Aristotle, and other classical philosophers were studied once again, and new ideas emerged. The Renaissance marked a turning point in human history, as it was during this time that many of the great advancements in science, art, and literature took place. The revival of classical knowledge during the Renaissance sparked a revolution in intellectual thought. The study of classical texts led to a more scientific, empirical approach to understanding the world. Thinkers like Galileo, Copernicus, and Newton, who were inspired by the works of ancient scholars, began to question long-held beliefs about the cosmos. The scientific method, which emphasized observation, experimentation, and evidence, became the foundation of modern science. It was through the revival of ancient knowledge that Europe was able to make the intellectual leap that would ultimately lead to the Age of Enlightenment and the birth of modern civilization. Despite the revival of ancient knowledge during the Renaissance, much of what was lost in the destruction of the Library of Alexandria was never fully recovered. Many texts that had been housed in the library, especially those related to fields like mathematics, astronomy, and medicine, were lost forever. As we dive deeper into the story of the Library of Alexandria, we must pause to understand not only the materials it housed, but the cultural significance it carried. This library was much more than just a collection of scrolls. It was a beacon of intellectual achievement, an emblem of the ancient world's vast knowledge and culture. What made it so unique, and why did it matter so much to the ancient world? The library was built under the rule of Ptolemy II Philadelphus in the 3rd century BCE, during the height of the Hellenistic period. Its creation was not merely a gesture of grandeur, but an attempt to bring the best knowledge from across the world to the heart of Alexandria, one of the most vibrant and diverse cities of the ancient Mediterranean. Scholars, scribes, and philosophers from all corners of the known world were invited to contribute to its collection, making it a true melting pot of ideas. What did this mean for the intellectual development of the ancient world? For the first time in history, a single institution aimed to collect all human knowledge, regardless of origin or cultural background. The library was a symbol of unity, where the best ideas from Greek, Egyptian, Persian, Indian, and even Hebrew thought could be shared, critiqued, and advanced. It was a place where cross-cultural dialogue could take place, where different philosophies and sciences could be debated and discussed. The texts housed in the library were diverse, covering everything from mathematics to astronomy, medicine to philosophy. The works of Homer, Herodotus, and Euclid were carefully stored and preserved. But it wasn't just Greek thought that was featured. Egyptian religious texts, Persian literature, and the works of Indian scholars on mathematics and astronomy were brought to Alexandria, showcasing the global breadth of knowledge. This mixing of cultures made the Library of Alexandria unique in the ancient world. This melting pot of ideas also had a profound impact on the scholars who studied there. Alexandria became a hub for intellectual exchange, where thinkers like Euclid, Archimedes, and Eratosthenes made groundbreaking discoveries. The library wasn't just a repository, it was an incubator for new ideas and innovations that would shape the future of science, philosophy, and mathematics for centuries to come. But as much as the Library of Alexandria was a symbol of intellectual achievement, it also represented the fragility of knowledge itself. It's easy to imagine a world where this treasure trove of information survived intact, where its scrolls and manuscripts were preserved for future generations to study and learn from. But history, as we know, has a way of being far more unpredictable and destructive than we often imagine. We often hear the phrase, "knowledge is power," but it's worth considering why this saying resonates so strongly, particularly in relation to the Library of Alexandria. Throughout history, the destruction of knowledge has often been tied to the fall of empires, the rise of new powers, or religious and political upheavals. In many cases, the act of destroying knowledge is a deliberate one, an effort to suppress ideas that threaten the status quo. The destruction of the Library of Alexandria was not a single event, but a gradual process that unfolded over centuries. The library faced a series of attacks, both physical and ideological, which ultimately led to its downfall. These attacks came from many directions. The Romans, the Christians, and the Muslims all played a part in the eventual destruction of this great institution. The first blow came during the Roman conquest of Alexandria in 48 BCE, when Julius Caesar's forces set fire to the city's harbour. The fire spread to the library, destroying much of its collection. But this was not the end. The library was rebuilt and continued to function, though its importance was beginning to wane. In the 4th century CE, with the rise of Christianity and the subsequent decline of pagan traditions, the library faced another wave of destruction. The philosopher and bishop Theophilus of Alexandria was known to have ordered the destruction of pagan temples and libraries, further diminishing the intellectual heritage of the ancient world. But perhaps the most devastating blow came in the 7th century CE, with the Arab conquest of Alexandria. The library's fate after this period remains a matter of speculation, but it is believed that the remaining scrolls and manuscripts were either lost or destroyed during this time. What exactly was lost in the destruction of the Library of Alexandria? Historians and scholars have long speculated about the contents of the library, but the true extent of its collection remains a mystery. Some believe that it housed hundreds of thousands of scrolls, while others suggest that the number may have been far lower. As we continue our exploration of the Library of Alexandria and its profound impact on history, it's crucial to understand how the loss of such a monumental institution reverberated across time. The library wasn't merely a collection of scrolls and papyri. It was a symbol of a golden age of intellectual and cultural exchange that shaped not just the ancient world, but also the foundations of the modern one. The destruction of the library, while tragic, didn't end the pursuit of knowledge, but it did force humanity to rethink how to preserve and protect its intellectual legacy. As we examine the aftermath of the loss, we also need to look at the ways in which human civilization rebuilt the infrastructure for knowledge preservation, learning from the past while adapting to new realities. After the Library of Alexandria was destroyed, intellectual centers continued to thrive in various parts of the world. In the East, particularly within the Islamic world, scholars took on the responsibility of preserving the knowledge of the ancients. During the early medieval period, while Europe faced its dark ages, the Islamic world became the intellectual beacon of the time. Great libraries and centers of learning, such as the House of Wisdom in Baghdad, became the new centers for scholarly exchange. In the Islamic Golden Age, scholars translated key Greek and Roman works into Arabic, ensuring the preservation of classical knowledge that had once been housed in Alexandria. Many of the texts lost in the library's fire were preserved in this manner, and scholars like Al-Razi, Avicenna, and Al-Farabi made significant contributions to fields such as mathematics, medicine, and astronomy. These intellectual achievements, many of which were built on the foundations of knowledge from the Library of Alexandria, were then reintroduced to Europe during the Renaissance. Meanwhile, in Europe, the preservation of knowledge began to take on new forms. The rise of Christian monasteries and later universities helped safeguard ancient texts. Monks in the West diligently copied manuscripts by hand, carefully transcribing them to ensure their survival. However, it's important to note that these efforts were not without their challenges, as political and religious upheavals often led to the destruction of libraries and intellectual centers, reminiscent of what happened in Alexandria. Perhaps the most significant period following the destruction of the Library of Alexandria was the Renaissance. Beginning in the 14th century, this intellectual and cultural movement sparked a revival of interest in classical antiquity. Humanism, the intellectual movement at the core of the Renaissance, emphasized the study of ancient texts, philosophy, and art, many of which had been preserved in the Middle East and later reintroduced to the West. During this time, scholars began to search for long-lost Greek and Roman manuscripts, many of which had been rediscovered in monasteries, libraries, and by scholars in the Islamic world. The study of classical texts, especially those preserved by Islamic scholars, laid the foundation for the advances in science, art, and literature that would follow. Figures like Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Galileo were profoundly influenced by these ancient works. The rediscovery of these texts also led to a renewed interest in the philosophies of Plato, Aristotle, and other classical thinkers, whose ideas had laid the groundwork for Western thought. In this way, the legacy of the Library of Alexandria, although physically lost, found new life during the Renaissance, helping to shape the intellectual climate of the Western world for centuries to come. One of the most remarkable inventions in human history that played a pivotal role in preserving and disseminating knowledge was the printing press. Invented by Johannes Gutenberg in the 15th century, the printing press revolutionized the way knowledge was spread across Europe. For the first time, books could be mass-produced, making text available to a much broader audience. This innovation marked the end of the hand copying of manuscripts and the beginning of a new era in the preservation of knowledge. The printing press also facilitated the wider distribution of the rediscovered works from the ancient world, many of which had been preserved by scholars in the Islamic world and brought back to the West. Printed books helped democratize knowledge, making it accessible to a wider range of people and transforming society in ways that echoed the intellectual flourishing once seen in the Library of Alexandria. In this period, libraries and institutions of learning began to flourish across Europe. The creation of national libraries and the rise of universities in cities like Oxford, Paris, and Bologna helped to institutionalize the preservation and advancement of knowledge. While the Library of Alexandria may have been lost to time, these new institutions helped carry the... As we continue our exploration of the Library of Alexandria and its profound impact on history, it's crucial to understand how the loss of such a monumental institution reverberated across time. The library wasn't merely a collection of scrolls and papyri. It was a symbol of a golden age of intellectual and cultural exchange that shaped not just the ancient world, but also the foundations of the modern one. The destruction of the library, while tragic, didn't end the pursuit of knowledge, but it did force humanity to rethink how to preserve and protect its intellectual legacy. As we examine the aftermath of the loss, we also need to look at the ways in which human civilization rebuilt the infrastructure for knowledge preservation, learning from the past while adapting to new realities. After the Library of Alexandria was destroyed, intellectual centers continued to thrive in various parts of the world. In the East, particularly within the Islamic world, scholars took on the responsibility of preserving the knowledge of the ancients. During the early medieval period, while Europe faced its dark ages, the Islamic world became the intellectual beacon of the time. Great libraries and centers of learning, such as the House of Wisdom in Baghdad, became the new centers for scholarly exchange. In the Islamic Golden Age, scholars translated key Greek and Roman works into Arabic, ensuring the preservation of classical knowledge that had once been housed in Alexandria. Many of the texts lost in the library's fire were preserved in this manner, and scholars like Al-Razi, Avicenna, and Al-Farabi made significant contributions to fields such as mathematics, medicine, and astronomy. These intellectual achievements, many of which were built on the foundations of knowledge from the Library of Alexandria, were then reintroduced to Europe during the Renaissance. Meanwhile, in Europe, the preservation of knowledge began to take on new forms. The rise of Christian monasteries and later universities helped safeguard ancient texts. Monks in the West diligently copied manuscripts by hand, carefully transcribing them to ensure their survival. However, it's important to note that these efforts were not without their challenges, as political and religious upheavals often led to the destruction of libraries and intellectual centers, reminiscent of what happened in Alexandria. Perhaps the most significant period, following the destruction of the Library of Alexandria, was the Renaissance. Beginning in the 14th century, this intellectual and cultural movement sparked a revival of interest in classical antiquity. Humanism, the intellectual movement at the core of the Renaissance, emphasized the study of ancient texts, philosophy, and art, many of which had been preserved in the Middle East and later reintroduced to the West. During this time, scholars began to search for long-lost Greek and Roman manuscripts, many of which had been rediscovered in monasteries, libraries, and by scholars in the Islamic world. The study of classical texts, especially those preserved by Islamic scholars, laid the foundation for the advances in science, art, and literature that would follow. Figures like Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Galileo were profoundly influenced by these ancient works. The rediscovery of these texts also led to a renewed interest in the philosophies of Plato, Aristotle, and other classical thinkers, whose ideas had laid the groundwork for Western thought. In this way, the legacy of the Library of Alexandria, although physically lost, found new life during the Renaissance, helping to shape the intellectual climate of the Western world for centuries to come. One of the most remarkable inventions in human history that played a pivotal role in preserving and disseminating knowledge was the printing press. Invented by Johannes Gutenberg in the 15th century, the printing press revolutionized the way knowledge was spread across Europe. For the first time, books could be mass-produced, making texts available to a much broader audience. This innovation marked the end of the hand copying of manuscripts and the beginning of a new era in the preservation of knowledge. The printing press also facilitated the wider distribution of the rediscovered works from the ancient world, many of which had been preserved by scholars in the Islamic world and brought back to the West. Printed books helped democratize knowledge, making it accessible to a wider range of people and transforming society in ways that echoed the intellectual flourishing once seen in the Library of Alexandria. In this period, libraries and institutions of learning began to flourish across Europe. The creation of national libraries and the rise of universities in cities like Oxford, Paris, and Bologna helped to institutionalize the preservation and advancement of knowledge. The story of the Library of Alexandria has fascinated historians, scholars, and thinkers for centuries. What was lost in the flames of the Great Library has shaped not only our understanding of the past, but also our vision for the future. Its destruction left an indelible mark on human history, a symbol of the fragility of knowledge and the sometimes destructive forces that seek to control it. Yet, its legacy has proven resilient. The ideal of a grand library, an institution that houses the collective knowledge of humanity, continues to inspire us today. As the world moves forward, the lessons of Alexandria remind us that preserving knowledge is an ongoing task, one that requires both vigilance and dedication. The Library of Alexandria, at its peak, was the greatest repository of knowledge the ancient world had ever known. Scholars from all corners of the Mediterranean and beyond came to Alexandria to study, to share ideas, and to further the cause of human understanding. The library was not just a physical space. It was a beacon of intellectual curiosity, a place where the boundaries of knowledge were constantly being pushed. Yet, despite the immense wealth of knowledge it contained, the library was destroyed by a series of tragic events, each contributing to the eventual loss of countless texts and manuscripts. The loss of the library is particularly poignant because it represents the destruction of so much more than books and scrolls. It signifies the destruction of an era of intellectual exchange and collaboration. The ancient world had been a place of vibrant dialogue between cultures, and the Library of Alexandria had been at the heart of that exchange. The library brought together scholars from Egypt, Greece, Persia, India, and beyond. Through the sharing of ideas and the translation of texts, the library played a critical role in advancing science, mathematics, philosophy, and literature. The fire that destroyed it extinguished not just the library, but the intellectual network that had helped shape the ancient world. In the centuries following the library's destruction, many attempts were made to rebuild the spirit of Alexandria. While no single institution could ever replicate the library's grandeur or scope, the concept of a central hub for learning and the preservation of knowledge endured. Throughout the Middle Ages, scholars worked to preserve and copy ancient texts, ensuring that the wisdom of the past would not be entirely lost. During the Renaissance, a renewed interest in the classics led to the rediscovery of ancient texts that had been preserved in libraries throughout the Islamic world. The Renaissance sparked a new era of intellectual exploration, and the pursuit of knowledge once again became central to human progress. The modern era, with its technological advancements and rapid expansion of knowledge, has seen new institutions arise that echo the ideals of the Library of Alexandria. The internet has become a vast digital library, containing more information than any individual could possibly consume in a lifetime. With initiatives like the open access movement, the democratization of knowledge has become a driving force in academia. Digital archives and databases are making once-forgotten texts and manuscripts available to anyone with an internet connection. The creation of the Bibliotheca Alexandrina in Alexandria, Egypt, is a modern attempt to honor the spirit of the ancient library. This new library, with its stunning architecture and commitment to open access, serves as a reminder that the search for knowledge is an ongoing endeavor. The story of the Library of Alexandria also serves as a reminder of the importance of protecting our cultural and intellectual heritage. The destruction of the library highlights the vulnerability of knowledge to the ravages of time, conflict, and neglect. Today, in an age of information overload, it is crucial that we continue to invest in the preservation of both physical and digital knowledge. Efforts to digitize historical texts, conserve ancient manuscripts, and protect cultural artifacts are essential to ensuring that the wisdom of the past is not lost to future generations. We must recognize that knowledge is not just an academic resource, it is a cultural treasure, a foundation upon which our civilization is built. One of the key lessons from the Library of Alexandria's destruction is the importance of intellectual freedom. The library was a place where scholars were free to explore ideas, engage in debates, and share knowledge without fear of censorship or persecution. In many ways, the library stood as a symbol of the free flow of ideas. The loss of such an institution underscores the dangers of intellectual repression and the importance of maintaining spaces where ideas can be freely exchanged. Even though the Library of Alexandria is long gone, the world continues to search for its lost knowledge. Over the centuries, rumors have spread about hidden scrolls that may have escaped destruction. Some believe that fragments of the library's vast collection were smuggled out before the fires. Others think that copies of some of the texts ended up in other libraries across the ancient world. Whether or not that's true, the idea has fueled countless searches and inspired generations of historians, archaeologists, and explorers. Some texts that may have once been in the Library of Alexandria are still known today. Works by great thinkers like Aristotle, Euclid, Archimedes, and Ptolemy have survived in one form or another. These texts help shape the development of science and philosophy, but we can only guess how many other brilliant works were lost forever, books that could have changed the world had they survived. The absence of these lost works is a kind of silence that echoes through time, reminding us of what might have been. The story of the library also teaches us how human decisions, intentional or accidental, can have massive consequences. The library's destruction wasn't caused by a single villain or one terrible moment. It was the result of many events, stretched out over centuries. Political battles, invasions, religious tensions, and neglect all played a part. Each blow weakened the library until, one day, it simply could not stand anymore. This teaches us a powerful lesson. Even the greatest institutions can fall if they are not protected, respected, and valued. That's why libraries today are so important. They are not just places to borrow books. They are homes for learning, discovery, and imagination. They are spaces where people from all walks of life can come together to read, research, and grow. In many ways, every modern library is a small reflection of what the Library of Alexandria once was. They are built on the same dream, the dream that knowledge should be shared, preserved, and passed on to others. Technology has also changed the way we preserve knowledge. Today we can scan old books, store data in the cloud, and share information instantly with people across the globe. This makes it easier than ever to protect ideas from being lost. But it also brings new challenges. Digital data can be erased, devices can fail, online content can disappear. Just like ancient scrolls, digital information must be handled with care. The tools have changed, but the goal remains the same: to protect what we know so that others may learn from it. Around the world, there are still people who risk their lives to protect books and knowledge. In times of war and conflict, libraries are sometimes targeted and destroyed. History has shown this again and again, in World War II, in the wars in the Middle East, and in other places where books were burned to silence ideas. These modern tragedies echo the story of Alexandria, and they remind us that the loss of knowledge is not just about facts and information. It is about silencing voices, erasing cultures, and cutting off the path to understanding. But there is hope. Just as the dream of Alexandria has never truly died, there are always people working to preserve and rebuild knowledge. Every time someone opens a book, scans a document, teaches a lesson, or writes down a new idea, they become part of the same story. They continue the work that began in ancient times. They help keep the light of learning alive. So what can we learn from the fall of the Library of Alexandria? First, we learn that knowledge is precious. It can lift civilizations, shape the future, and connect us across time and space. Second, we learn that it must be protected, not just with walls or vaults, but with care, respect, and the belief that it matters. And third, we learn that even if knowledge is lost, the human spirit keeps reaching for it. That spark of curiosity, that hunger to understand the world, never truly dies. The Library of Alexandria may be gone, but it is not forgotten. Its ruins live on in the pages of history books, in the dreams of scholars, and in every library that opens its doors to the world. It stands as a symbol of what we once had, and what we can build again if we choose to value learning above fear, understanding above destruction, and hope above silence. In that way, perhaps the Library of Alexandria was not truly destroyed. Perhaps it simply transformed from a building of stone and scrolls into a story that still inspires us, a story that asks us to protect what we know, to seek what we don't, and to always keep the flame of knowledge burning